Please rate panels on the app if you enjoy them. Give us feedback on what you like and don't like. I do read all the comments. The comments are very helpful if you need to give me context behind why you gave us a 3 or a 2 or whatever. Like the track director talks too much, like, go ahead, put that down. Our charity for DragonCon this weekend is NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. It is a really worthy charity. It's very helpful. We have the change bucket down here. Also, there's a lot of other events throughout DragonCon that are raising money for our charity. DragonCon has pledged to match up to $150,000 worth of donations, and this is the highest goal they've set for us so far because we keep breaking all of the goals that they've set us as far as fundraising. So let's try to break this one again. Let's see, app, charity, microphones. Microphone use is mandatory in this room, so microphones are in the aisle, so if you have questions for the panels, and I'll let you guys know when I'm ready for questions, please move to one of those if you are able to. If you're not able to, one of the volunteers will bring you a microphone. But it's an accessibility thing, even if you're not hard of hearing. It is much easier to focus your attention on an amplified voice versus unamplified, so it's nice for our neurodivergent friends. And I think that's it. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jennifer. I am the track director for High Fantasy. You guys probably see me around doing this track or other fantasy-related things in Atlanta. And to my right, I have...
Hi, my name is Scott Lynch. Okay, let me go back a moment. Since I've just discovered that the panel will be getting a rating on Yelp, if you like what I have to say, my name is Scott Lynch. If you don't, my name is Patrick Rothfuss. Honest and true. That's how it be. I'm the author of the Lies of Locke Lamora and its sequels, Red Seas Under Red Skies and the Republic of Thieves, and the increasingly less hypothetical sequel, Thorn of Emberlane, plus a bunch of short works in the same universe and a bunch of short works all over the place. And it's 10 a.m. on Sunday. Why? Why?
Good morning. I'm Jan Paquette. I write cheesy vampire love stories with happy endings. That's my jam. And then during the day, I'm a professor and I do textbooks and stuff.
Hello, I'm Allora Lee. I write high fantasy and lit RPG. I'm the author of Otherworldly: A Shattered Awakening. It's Sadko Magic. Love that. But yeah. In the daytime, I'm an accountant.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Philip Ligon. I write steampunk, I write fantasy, like to dabble in magic and machines and what you can do when you combine both of those together. What kind of creations can you make? Leads to all kinds of interesting possibilities. I have a couple of series out right now. This one, the first book in it, was nominated for a Dragon Award a few years ago. It's been a little So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Okay, and I forgot to mention this before, but there was a schedule change, so this panel is about anti-heroes, not specifically David Gemmell's stories, but since David Gemmell included a lot of anti-heroes in his work, we will still be talking about that. Okay, so my starter question for the panel is, what qualities make an anti-hero different from a hero? Jennifer, you want to take that one first?
Alright, so your hero is going to be all about sacrificing themselves for the greater good, and your anti-hero would be the opposite. They will sacrifice the greater good for themselves or something selfish, whether it's vengeance or their idea of love or something like that. So I think it's that, that putting themselves above everybody else versus the heroes that he's going to be picking everybody else.
Okay, any other thoughts? Go ahead, Allora.
Yeah, I would add that sometimes that selfishness can come through as like their idea of the greater good too. Like they can make bad moves that are clearly wrong, but as long as it provides them with their ideal that seems to be their greater good, that is also to me a key aspect of an anti-hero. They're not bad for the sake of bad, right?
And I would say it's maybe more of a reluctance on the part of the character, not really wanting to put themselves into that heroic situation, but like David Gimble, his characters, a lot of reluctant heroes there. They don't really want to go into battle, they don't really want to do what has to be done, but they do find it in themselves to do it because they're called to do it, but not because they are necessarily seeking that out. So I think a lot of anti-heroes, there is some reluctance in there.
Right, you know, I mean, anti is such a loaded phrase, you know, that it can be really easy to forget that, you know, we're not talking about a direct opposite, but mostly we're talking about, you know, protagonists that are crafted less to embody what you might call classic virtues, and more of a bittersweet tapestry of life itself, which is a phrase I stole from Stephen Bruce, which we pass back and forth in our house a great deal. But you know, it's as he alluded to, it's also it sort of implies certain elements of kind of being caught up in events rather than driving them completely. It's you know, a bit of realism injected into the protagonism. One of the phrases that constantly recurs with Michael Moorcock's Elric is the term "sailor on the seas of fate." Which is kind of a neat encapsulation of you know, the lot of most anti-heroes, which is that they find themselves in situations they did not necessarily choose.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker has the call to adventure. He has the classic hero's journey. He wants to be rescuing the princess, and Han Solo's like, so I'm gonna get paid for this, right? So that's kind of like the difference between them. They're both heroic characters. They both embody virtues that are heroic, but they approach it in a different way. So, okay. So anti-heroes tend to be a little edgy, like a little darker. What makes an anti-hero more edgy, too edgy? Like what's the line between hero and villain here? Or not sympathetic versus unsympathetic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they kill main characters that I love.
Okay.
I think it's really brought back to how they're told narratively if you're inside their head. Because if you don't understand what they're doing and why, you can make almost anything kind of sympathetic if you get into the head well enough and you like logic it out, right? But if you're taking it back, sometimes it just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of like Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones. Like the first book, you don't get a point of view from him, and you're like, this guy's a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start getting his point of view, you're like, oh, there's some reason behind what he's doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and really, some of the best villains out there are sympathetic in some way. I mean, it's to make them human, so to speak, makes the reader really struggle with, okay, am I really rooting for this villain? Am I not? The anti-hero, there is some aspects of that as well. Am I really rooting for this person? He seems kind of selfish, and yet he's doing the right thing, and he or she is doing the right thing. They're doing what needs to be done, but they're doing it for those selfish reasons sometimes. Like Han Solo, yeah, you want Han Solo to win, but then Han Solo again is out for money all the time. He's in it for what he can get out of it, and yet he ends up doing the right thing. So there is a fine line there between making them people we really, really root for in the end versus somebody that we just really despise, like you would a villain.
It's interesting that in fiction, you know, we carry the burden of, you know, adding elements of sympathy or at least understanding to, you know, the characters that we would describe as villains, whereas real life, you know, as I've discovered, just has no such obligation. And, you know, in the real universe, you know, you can be a catastrophic, lumbering, dead-eyed moron and you know, still be the villain of the piece. But look, we have an obligation to be more subtle than real life. You know, for some reason we have to do better in our fiction. You know, the point at which it all becomes too much, I think, is always going to, I mean, you know, the most honest answer in all art and craft is, it depends, but that's also the biggest cop-out. Like, it's true, but it's not concrete. I mean, it's going to depend on your audience. It's going to depend on your intentions. You know, I expect things from, you know, say A Song of Ice and Fire that I never would have expected from, say, Harry Potter. You know, at least in the beginning. You know, if I'm reading a DuckTales tie-in comic, I don't expect to find a red wedding. But you know, so everyone's got to set their own boundaries, and sometimes, you know, people find while they're in the process of reading something that this author or this series or this subgenre has maybe gone too far for them. I think the thing that sets my teeth most on edge, and I say this as somebody who's kind of been circling that pit, realizing that it's a trap, is being edgy for the sake of being edgy, rather than being edgy for actual plot relevant reasons, because nothing ages worse than an author going, "Tee, aren't I terrible? Aren't I just the awfulest? I you know, kill, pillage, sexual assault, page 3, etc., etc." If that doesn't get incorporated into an actual useful point of the narrative, boy, that can get old really, really, really quick. And I mean, this is me talking, I have a fairly high squick factor, so if I find myself looking at a book going, wow, man, this guy kills a lot of characters, or, you know, this person has a lot of blood on their pages, like, it's me. But even I have boundaries.
Okay. So thinking about that, like, what are some good examples of anti-heroes done well and anti-heroes done poorly?
I'm gonna throw out Sir Apropos of Nothing, sorry, by Peter David.
Okay.
That, like, takes the whole hero trope. He literally steals the hero's moment. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that one, but he sees the hero like witnessing the birth of a phoenix, and it's like, you know, he's gonna be like, oh, and he tackles him and he steals the phoenix and he steals that man's story. And I was like,
Okay.
this is the best. So he's a terrible person. He's a villain, but he still follows that anti-hero line because he does kind of do the right thing.
Okay.
I would say Catherine Foundling from The Practical Guide to Evil. I don't know if anyone has read that here. It's amazing. She takes this stance of doing evil for good. When you follow her, she is doing everything for the sake of protecting her kingdom, even if it means taking an evil name, which is like a class. She becomes a squire to a dark knight, she kills people, she does what is necessary to protect the people of her land, and she becomes a villain in order to become the hero.
Okay.
It is an exceptional example of an anti-hero lead, in my opinion. I don't have a bad example off the top of my head at this moment.
Okay. How about you, Philip?
Yeah, I don't have a bad example off the top of my head either, but I'll throw out, with David Gemmell, you get all kinds of really good anti-heroes. You get Waylander, you get Druss, and a bunch of others with his works. I'll throw out Elric too. He's been mentioned before, one of my favorite characters, hands down. Those would be, for me, some really good examples of good anti-heroes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a problem with the bad examples, because I don't want to be a dillweed to certain writers that I may or may not be acquainted with in public. I prefer. Until somebody pisses me off personally, I don't want to be a jerk about their work in public. So let's just say that they exist. They're out there. They know who they are. they ought to feel bad. But, you know, I mean, anti-heroic figures, when I think of, like, you know, a classic science fiction example, Captain Signe Mallory in C.J. Cherry's Down Below Station. Just the stone cold classic example of the, you know, cold hard starship officer who will do anything and everything to achieve a victory. Very much sort of an Ice Queen archetype. Also an archetype that teenage Scott was very attracted to. But I mean, if you haven't read Down Below Station, you should. If you haven't read C.J. Cherry in general, she's up for a Dragon Award and has been at it for, you know, nearly 50 years now, and is just an absolutely brilliant writer in multiple fields. So take that as a plug. But returning to Druss, because I was under the erroneous impression that this was the David Gemmell panel, so I will plug him as well. That is just a classic British archetype of what I once upon a time, back before grimdark was a thing, when I was sort of learning my way around the genre, I sort of conceived a notion of a subgenre that I called blood and introspection, which I saw as largely a British phenomenon, which was basically, let's have a gigantic roaring bloodbath, and then let's sit around afterward and reflect on how it wasn't worth the candle. Which is, legend in a nutshell, which is very much, I'm sorry, I won't go on forever. I'm just very enthusiastic about Gemmel in general. And the thing is that Gemmel feeds into an awful lot of threads of our current literary situation, kind of like, a player in whatever sport of your choice advancing the ball up the field. Gemmel's ball was passed to a whole bunch of newer writers like Joe Abercrombie or Anna Sparks Smith. I mean, anyone who writes anything that is grimdark tinged in this day and age basically is in the literary lineage of David Gemmel. But this book is it's a New Orleans style funeral for Druss. The first time we meet him is the last time we're going to meet him, because he is an old legend. He is, someone people have been hearing about for years, coming out of retirement to face overwhelming odds, in the course of which, no spoilers, he dies. This is his greatest, the culmination of his greatest adventure is that he bites it in the face of 500,000 enemies. And that is the legend. So we're meeting him as he's stepping into the shadow, and that in and of itself colors him as an anti-heroic figure. It's not onward and upward to brighter days. It is, farewell to this guy, farewell, to the tomb with him, and nothing but the shell-shocked survivors afterward to say, wow, that was really something. So, sorry.
No, that's fantastic, thank you. So, yeah, this was originally going to be a David Gemmel panel, and I had trouble finding David Gemmel panelists, so we switched it to slightly more general. But I have not read David Gemmel, but if you guys want to talk about how David Gemmel handles anti-heroes, let's do that for a minute, because I think there's a lot of people who came here for David Gemmel.
Woo!
So, oh, you guys are so nice. Okay, so Philip, I know you had some thoughts about David Gemmel.
Yeah, so if you, for David Gemmel, he did embody a lot of, his books were a lot of violence in his books, a lot of fighting, a lot of anti-heroes, and yet David Gemmel, in all of his books, there was always hope. There was always, it always ended with something better. Yes, people sacrifice themselves. Yes, people sacrifice themselves, but for the greater good. And it's really interesting if you look at his life. I don't know if anybody has ever read about his life and everything he went through. When he wrote Legend, his first book, he thought he had been diagnosed with cancer. That's what the doctors had told him, that he was battling cancer, and so he was dealing with that. He wrote Legend as a way of dealing with it, and it's actually an allegory into what he was going through. As Drozdanash was, the fortress was falling, that was his battle against cancer, and he actually left it open. When he wrote it, he left it open-ended because he wanted to determine his battle with cancer, how it was going to end, would be determined the end of Legend. As it turns out, he did not have cancer. I think he had a kidney problem. I think that was what it was. And so he went on and he finished the book, and it sat around for a while, and then one of his friends read it and said, hey, you need to do something with this. And he polished it up and submitted it, and the rest is history. So, but a lot of his books really reflect a lot of things that he went through in life. He had a very hard upbringing. His dad left the family. I'm going to ramble about David Gemmel here for a minute, so hope y'all can indulge me here.
No, go ahead.
But his dad left the family when he was really young. His mom remarried, but he grew up in that generation where a lot of dads had died in World War II, and a lot of his peers had lost fathers in the war. Well, he did not, and so that was always a point of contention growing up. And he I think I read something where he said he had like 120 stitches on his body from all the fights he got in when he was growing up. A lot of gangs, a lot of people just beating him up. He actually retreated into books to get away from all of that, which gave him a love for literature, Tolkien, and a lot of others, early fantasy stuff. He even did mysteries and thrillers. But a lot of those events, that shaped his life. He was around fighting, he was around violence, and so you actually find a lot of that in his books. And I think I want to say, was it Druss that he based it on his stepdad? I think it was, just because his stepdad said, look, you don't need to retreat into books, you need to learn how to fight and defend yourself, and actually made you take boxing lessons, and you learned how to fight. And so a lot of the fighting you find in his books, he would actually choreograph that out ahead of time. He said, fortunately, no neighbors were watching him when he did this in his backyard, but he would get out and actually choreograph his fights to figure out how he wanted to describe them. But as far as when they say write what you know, David Gemmell wrote what he knew. He knew the anti-heroes. He knew those reluctant people who would step up and do the right thing when they had to, when they were called to do it, and he knew what it meant to fight, but again, always with hope, always for the greater good. And so that really defined all of his works. So there's some thoughts on David Gemmell.
Yeah, no, that's great. Anybody else want to talk about him? I don't know if you two, because you were the anti-hero people I added.
I would just add, because that's, a pretty admirable overview of all things Gemmell. And I would also say, I do my fight choreography in the shower. Pro writing tip, no one has to see you when you do your blocking in the shower. If you look at where Gemmell sits, a lot of the stuff that was coming out kind of simultaneously or thereabouts, because Legend, written in late 70s, published in 82. And if you look at what was coming out of Britain in particular at that time, the slow evolution of 2000 AD from sort of a loosey-goosey, wow, look at these guys punching people comic to something much deeper and more satirical. Judge Dredd slowly becomes something other than a stupid adventure comic and becomes a vehicle for deep satire and commentary on American life. You also had the rise of things like Warhammer and Warhammer 40K. A lot of stuff that has this shared thread of gleefully dark, cynical, fatalistic, Red Dwarf, the TV show. You can put all these things on a shelf next to each other and kind of go, okay. So it was sort of a shared phenomenon. And again, all those currents feed into our current, pop culture and literary pools.
But with Gemmell, it was always hopeful. I think that's what really.
Yeah, no, I would not apply the word cynical to Gemmell.
Yeah. And he didn't like that word. He did not say,
no,
he did not like
defeatist.
defeatist. He did not like people like that. He was always had that hope.
So how much of this do you think was a response to post-war Britain's economic situation or the rise of Thatcherism? Is there any kind of response to that?
4 thumbs up.
Okay.
I don't want to talk forever, but the answer is yes, and also as you alluded to, Britain went through. The United States. We suffered a great many deaths in the Second World War, but compared to what Britain suffered in the First and Second World War, the UK lost 6% of its overall population in the First World War, and that was, explosively concentrated amongst its young men. Entire generations of young men were scythed down, out of which, we get people like Tolkien and their experience. And you can still see it. You can see the specter of this overlaying British pop culture. You can, the sheer number of World War I skits you find in Monty Python or shows like Blackadder. It was just there hovering over them in a way that it didn't hit us. And that whole post-war scarcity, post-war rationing in Britain continued until 1952, 7 years after the war ended. So it was death and misery and starvation, and it all, even if it took a generation to percolate, it all fed into it.
Okay, no, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it was, of course, more than just literature too. You can see it in the music that was coming out of Britain at the time, especially when you get into stuff like Pink Floyd and some of the stuff that they sing about. They're dealing with a lot of that. So it was literature, music, and again, just overall culture. You see a lot of that feeding into anything coming out of Britain after World War II.
So do you think that anti-heroes are more prevalent in this later generation, this second generation of high fantasy versus the first generation would be Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, second generation would be Gemmell and so forth. Do you think that reaction to World War II is what makes that second generation of high fantasy different than the first generation? Is my question making sense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's part of the fabric. I mean, it's like you can't put your finger on any one specific factor and say this made this literary movement.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it's absolutely there in the pressures that shape them and their reactions.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think throughout literature, you kind of get waves of this. Like, my brain just went to Robin Hood. I was like, what did we had a plague and then a peasant revolution, and then we made this terrible Robin Hood character. If you've read the originals, he's awful. And then they were like, no, hero. So they turned him into an anti-hero. So I think it's just this reaction. When things are bad, people will turn to looking at anti-heroes as that, like, you have to be sort of rough around the edges in order to be heroic for the age that we're living in.
Okay, so going a little bit back towards anti-heroes in general, we know about the hero's journey. The hero's journey, there's a call to adventure, he fights bad guy, whatever. Is there an anti-heroic journey, or is every anti-hero's journey going to be different? Allora, it looks like you.
So I think part of the anti-hero's journey, it's actually almost essential to me, is kind of the refusal of the call at first. They don't always want that journey. Now some of them, I don't necessarily think that it has to be that. I know I said the word essential earlier, but that's ridiculous. But the refusal of the call to me is iconic of an anti-hero.
Okay.
And then, this call has hands, so. It's that.
I think you're also reacting to the idea of the hero's cycle. Like, everybody knows the hero's journey, so when you're like, no, I'm not gonna do that, you still follow it by not following it. You're still acknowledging those steps.
Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, and with I would say a lot of the anti-heroes would follow the hero's journey. It's just that they probably struggle with it a little bit more. Each step along the way, there's more internal struggles than your typical hero who is embracing this opportunity and racing out to save the day, so to speak. That anti-hero is thinking, well, do I really want to save the day? Is this what I really need to do? I guess this is what I need to do. So you'll see that, I think, a lot more internal struggles along that journey.
Okay. Scott, do you have any thoughts?
Oh no, I'm content not to talk for just a moment. Let somebody else squeeze a yammer in.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you want to yammer, I can talk about how progression fantasy has that hero that is going for that power.
Yeah, please do.
Constantly. And we've seen in progression fantasy how sometimes going after power for the sake of being the hero, for the sake of just gaining more power in order to do good, that's great. It's also gotten a little bit stereotypical of the progression genre. They've seen it go through so many times that now you're seeing this offshoot of how anti-hero leads are leading lit RPG, that they don't want to be the hero to save their world in a system apocalypse, right? But they've been chosen. They're still not a great person. They're still being forced to make these choices that they didn't want. And you see it a lot in lit RPG now, that they have to force themselves to grow in order to get the power to refuse the call if they want it. So.
Yeah, lit RPG is not a genre or subgenre of a subgenre that I'm terribly familiar with, even though my track does handle that. I can't read everything.
Yeah.
So can you give us some examples of progression fantasies that have that anti-hero?
So actually, I already said one. I would say Practical Guide to Evil
Okay.
is generally a progression fantasy. I mean, she is constantly pursuing more and more power under the guise of a semi-type of system. They call it names, where you get skills and you get things like that. It's not technically a system world, but it's more like a fantasy-based rule world.
Okay.
So I would say Practical Guide to Evil is a good introduction to that. There is also
I just
the
had
microphone.
yeah.
Thank you.
I was just gonna ask, how do you differentiate in your experience the anti-heroes of lit RPG from the ones that are just straight up villains who just want power? Because I think in a lot of cases, especially in genres like System Apocalypse, it feels like they aren't heroes, they're just anti-heroes, they're just sympathetic villains. So how do you draw that line?
So, I would say in lit RPG specifically, it is entirely dependent on the purpose of like a system apocalypse, right? A lot of times in a system apocalypse, it's trying to cull all of humanity. So if you don't know much about system apocalypse stories, they tend to like feature like an alien invasion kind of. It's almost exactly, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But to differentiate between the villains, you have to really look into where their long-term path is, because some of them do start that way. They get this system apocalypse and they're like, okay, I'm immediately gonna go to like protecting myself, what's mine, without any care for the other people, and they have to grow into caring. Because at first it's like a survival mentality, and so once they grow out of that survival mentality, that's when they move from a sympathetic villain to more anti-hero.
Okay. Yeah, so that was actually my next question is, can villains ever become anti-heroes? Like, the one I'm thinking of, because I'm going to think of pop culture movies, is Loki in the MCU. Loki is introduced as a villain, but because he's played by Tom Hiddleston, he's very sympathetic as a villain, and sort of morphs into more of an anti-heroic figure, and to the point where he is making heroic sacrifices at the end of his journey. For the 5 or 6 of you who have seen Loki season 2. I have issues with that show. Anyways, so do we, are there any other examples that can villains become anti-heroes, and what does that journey look like in comparison to an actual heroic journey?
Oh, me specifically?
I mean,
okay.
If you want to, go for it.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is the growth mindset, right? It's not always voluntary. Sometimes their situation has forced them to grow from just being a villain out to do whatever they want just to make their lives easier or better, or their version of the greater good, and they're impacted through the characters that are introduced to support that narrative, to force them to change, because they grow attached to this and they grow attached to the ideals of the other characters, that can often shift a villain into that anti-hero mindset where they're going for a new greater good that maybe is more in line with a stereotypical hero. Right?
Okay.
The vampire lover in me is gonna throw out Damon from Vampire Diaries. I don't know if anybody is a big fan, but you have this, and it's a love story. So he starts as a terrible villain, and then he falls in love with a girl, and then he's like, all right, well, I'll save you. And then it's like, all right, well, I'll save like your circle of friends. And then, all right, I'll save your town. And then I think that's kind of how he shifts into an anti-hero area. He's still terrible, but not if you're in the circle.
And I'll throw out Darth Vader is a villain who ended up as an anti-hero. I mean, well, Anakin started out more kind of as an anti-hero.
Yeah, he's more of a fallen hero. Yeah.
Who went on the villain path, but then at the very end, what did he do? He saved Luke. He saved
Spoiler.
Leia. He killed the Emperor.
Oh, is that what happens? Oh.
Yeah, spoilers. So he's a great example of somebody, of a villain who ends up being an anti-hero.
Well, go ahead. I'll jump back when you're done.
I just had a quick question on, for all of y'all, at what point does a character or anti-hero or villain kind of cross that threshold? Like you mentioned Darth Vader, a genocidal maniac, man's crossover. Scott, you had two guys cut off fingers of a man and cut out a tongue. And granted, it was reasonable, but
It made sense at the time.
That's just New Jersey, buddy.
at what point for all of you is like, is it kind of a justified fall or a justified, like a redemption, I guess? Like, is there any character you could think of that's too far gone?
Well, okay, sorry, I'll try to be quick. I should be quick and merciful. And I will put a pin in what we were just talking about, because I think I want to circle back and talk about it, but I'll deal with this question directly. I mean, I will say from my own perspective, like some of the things you've alluded to, I put stuff in my own work that is deliberately intended to go beyond a line in my own head. My own protagonists do awful things, and they don't always have the greatest appreciation of the consequences of those things. They can be a little bit reckless, they can be a bit much, because I write them to be funny, I write them to be sympathetic, I write them to be human, but they're also fundamentally gangsters. I love a great many gangster movies. Obviously they inform a lot of my work, but you at some point also have to confront the fact that these charming, interesting individuals are, putting bodies in trunks or in holes in the desert, that they live a life of violence and exploitation. And that's a very difficult, circle to square, and I think you deal with that sometimes by not doing it. There's a particular bit toward the end of The Lies of Locke Lamora, where my protagonist essentially ruins some poor schmuck's life. He takes on the role of a waiter at a counting house to get an audience with the guy who runs the counting house, and then bustles this guy out the door, puts some money in his hand, and says, "You have to leave town, buddy. Your life here is done. This is a harsh medieval fantasy world. There's no judgment coming for you except a dagger in the back of an alley. You will be treated as though you betrayed your employer. I have screwed your life up. You must flee." That to me is an unforgivable, in a book full of murders and crimes and con artistry and so on and so forth, randomly ruining some guy's life to gain a momentary advantage, making him just a casualty of this personal war, is one of those unforgivable things. Because it kind of shocks me sometimes how much license we get from our audiences. How much protagonists get treated as being in the right, even when we write them to clearly be wrong. I'm like, nobody could miss the point, and people are like, I love the scene where he does the torture. And you're like, I tried to make it very clear this was bad. You can never make it clear enough for some people. So sometimes the line is there in the book and in my own head, and the crossing is deliberate, and there is just no going back.
Alright, then you wanted to, oh yeah, you have a comment?
Yeah, so I did have a comment about that, because it also, when you talk about redemption in fantasy and novels and things like that, it's very different than redemption in real life, right? The narrative can support most redemptions, in a sense, in novels and fantasy, because we're looking for that. We want to love these characters that we're reading about. So there are some things that are like unforgivable sins, right? A casualty for the sake of a casualty just because you have a personal vendetta. But at the end of the day, the readers will still look at it and say, well, he does these other things, and that's great. So, it's fine.
He killed all those people, but he did rescue a kitten.
Yeah.
So
what redemption looks like.
He killed a lot of people, but he's Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah.
He just tried a mass genocide, it's fine.
Well, the one line you don't cross is killing the dog.
Yeah.
That's John Wick.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, we're a country that loves documentaries about serial killers, so.
It's true. Yeah.
Speaking to, something Philip had mentioned, little known obscure cult figure Darth Vader. So somewhere at DragonCon is, at this very moment, is Timothy Zahn, who back in the very early 90s wrote the grand continuation of the Star Wars saga, the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which, spoilers, I absolutely fucking love. And Zahn did an awful lot of intricate thinking about how the Star Wars galaxy worked and what the consequences of those movies would have been. And one of the things that he emphasizes in those books is that the redemption of Darth Vader is basically a Skywalker family secret. Like, it's something that only a couple people in the Rebel Alliance know about, because to the rest of the galaxy at large, Darth Vader is the murderer of millions of people, the face of the Empire, you know, a maniac, a figure of nightmare. And there's nothing they can do about that. They can't counteract that, and it serves no political purpose to say, he did one really nice thing at the end of his life. Like, he earned his tossing emperor's merit badge in the waning moments of his life. So they just sit on it. It's a really interesting dynamic in that, yeah, he kind of redeemed himself, but in the eyes of the galaxy at large, there will never be redemption for that figure.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Okay, so I want to make sure we have some time for the audience questions, because I think you guys are getting a little restless. You want to ask your own questions. So if you have questions for the panelists, go ahead and move to the microphones if you have anything.
Sure. I'll take the first crack.
All right, do it. Do it.
So, taking the trope to what of its zenith is, do you have any recommendations, good suggestions about a protagonist anti-hero with an antagonist hero? Also, quick side question, David Barger is a practical guide to evil? I was trying to look up that book.
I can't remember what his real name is. I read it as a web serial, and I want to say it's Erratica Ada was his username.
Okay, I did see that.
Yeah. So actually, yes. If you have ever heard of Hinch, the protagonist.
I love that book.
That book is so good.
Yeah.
The protagonist is an anti-hero. She works as a villain's minion, okay? But she starts as just like a regular like clerical worker, and she gets basically wronged by a superhero. And she spends the book trying to right those wrongs for everybody. In a way, there's some subtext there that goes on, but Hinch by, do you remember the author name? Maria?
I can't remember her name, but it's very good. Yeah, it's, you know, she works for a temp agency that like places her with supervillains, and she ends up getting like the best temp job ever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
It's very good.
And the second book is supposed to come out within the next year and a half. It's called Right Hand, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for hiring.
Yeah. No, just called Hinch. It should be Hinch.
Yeah.
Like henchman.
Is it Natalie Zeno-Weckles?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I knew there was a Z in there somewhere. Okay. All right. I think you were first.
Okay. So this is sort of directed towards Scott, but if any of you can answer it. So to what you were saying about like readers forgiving too much in protagonists, it feels like that happens a lot, and that's sort of what I was getting at with my earlier question about the line between villains, sympathetic villains, and anti-heroes. But it feels like it's very easy for readers when the point of view character is bad to forgive them. You see that with, Dune is a famous example where Herbert kind of got fed up with his readers and wrote, it was not subtle in Messiah, to say the least, to sort of correct that. But in any case, do you have any advice for how to make that clear, that you're not supposed to be rooting for a character?
You know, I mean, one of the things that I think I'm finally old and wise enough to accept is that you may try, but there is no point at which you can make anything clear enough for everybody who's ever going to read your book. I mean, my go-to example is from the Hunger Games. You know, many years ago on social media, a different world, a different age. I think we called it 2011. Some poor person on Twitter became, the object of derision for a week because they went to see the Hunger Games movie and said, I really liked it, but I can't believe they made Rue a black girl. And,
Did they not read the book?
Whirlwind. And the thing is, if you open The Hunger Games, the actual novel, and you get to that point, like the introduction of Rue is literally like, Katniss then saw a little girl from District 7, Rue, a black girl of blah 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 years old. It's like, it's right there in the first sentence that you meet her as part of a description. It's not hidden. They didn't change anything. The thing is, you can make things as visible as possible, and readers will still just miss it completely. So the thing is, you kind of have to take a deep breath, and like, this is not licensed to take no responsibility for your work, but you must realize that there is always an extreme which you're never going to have any control over. No one is going to receive your work exactly as you would intend, because you've never received anybody else's work exactly as they would have intended either. You know, I love Frank Herbert's work. I read everything Frank Herbert published when I was a teenager. I was a Frank Herbert obsessive. But he and I could have fist fights over our interpretations of what he wrote. You know, I could take him out on the curb and kick him around for some of the things that he wrote. You know, we would disagree profoundly about you know, everything. So part of it is just giving yourself permission to not think that it's on you. You can only do your best. Someone's gonna miss it.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Someone on the panel earlier mentioned Jaime Lannister, so I'm curious, getting back to the earlier question about villains becoming anti-heroes and sort of going back and forth, whether he's an example, right, pushes a kid out the window, nearly kills him in the beginning of the first book, and seeing inside his point of view, I agree, helps to sympathize him, but I think you also see he takes a journey, right, with Brienne of Tarth and starts trying to maybe actively make better decisions, at least where we are in the books. I'll just set aside the end of the show. Where the books are now, what's been printed, he still kind of maybe has crossed from villain into anti-hero, so I was curious for thoughts on that. And I think Scott mentioned earlier, he had another example on that question he wanted to get back to, so I'm curious what other example he maybe had in mind, because I know we moved on.
Okay, does anybody want to take that first part?
Not me.
No? Okay.
Sorry. I haven't finished that series yet.
Well, I mean, to be fair, so is the author. We can make those jokes in this room, it's a safe space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
with Jaime Lannister, you see a lot of, you're seeing a lot of internal conflicts with him. And some of those conflicts make him sympathetic, and then some of the things he does, again, yeah, it's just, whoa, why did you do that? I mean, that's just bad. But a lot of that goes back to Martin's writing and how he's presented the character and how he's developed that character, which causes us as readers to be conflicted. How do we really feel about Jaime? I mean, that says a lot to the way Martin's done it and to his style in general. You will do that with about any character. You think, man, this is a great character, great person. This is somebody to root for, and then they do something terrible, and you think, ooh, why'd they do that? So he is really good with his characters and making them feel real to the readers.
Okay, and then there was a question specifically for Scott.
Okay, so well, the point that I wanted to circle back to is that, you know, we were talking about the whole, you know, you talked about, I guess, the morphology of a character. You know, you have, you know, a role for a villain, and then you cast a, you know, particularly charming actor in that role, and you eventually realize that, you know, you have options that you didn't know you had before. And or you have a fan response that you didn't have before the movie was released. So you find yourself going, what else can we do with this? And I mean, this is something that happens over and over again in making narratives, which is that you know, as I describe it, you have a function-shaped hole in the narrative that you're writing. You know, I need a villain, I need a protagonist, I need, you know, a bar owner, I need, you know, a proctologist, whatever the object that you need might be. You know, you fill in blanks, and then after you've written it, you tend to discover that you have new uses for this thing you've made, new purposes you can turn it to. You know, Jaime Lannister is a sketch of a certain sort of thing, the first 100 pages of A Song of Ice and Fire. And then we learn more about him, and he becomes a completely different sort of animal, you know, 2 or 3 books into the series. So what I wanted to comment on was just the fact that this is a recurring phenomenon. It's happened with numerous characters, in my books, as I've sometimes mentioned. Originally, when I started sketching out the lives of Locke Lamora, I had my protagonist, and I thought, in my naive, young brain, what this guy needs is a sidekick. So I started sketching a character named Jean Tannen. And, it became readily apparent after this guy had been on the page for about 3 paragraphs that this guy was nobody's sidekick. That what I was actually writing was, a duality, a Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, 2 best buds, completely inseparable, especially if the writer knows what they're doing. Because what I want to comment on here is how much of this is meta-narrative, how much of this comes from, our needs as writers, our discoveries as writers, and our interactions with the audience. Like, at this point, Jean is half the golden goose of the Gentleman Bastard sequence. I can't flush him out the airlock unless I want to get murdered. It'd be like, killing the cat, killing the dog. These things you only do if you are willing to reap a very specific vanished whirlwind. But it's that whole notion of you just don't know what you have sometimes until you finish the story or you put it on the page, and then you discover you can repurpose it. And we see this over and over and over again. Like the entire show, Breaking Bad, is basically constructed in this fashion. Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul are kind of amazing because if you look at them in a vacuum, they seem to have been perfectly machined from the beginning. But half of the central characters of this story were only intended to be there for 1 weekend. They just discovered that, oh shit, the guy, Aaron Paul is a really good actor. We have to keep him around for more than 1 season. Oh shit, Mike is a really compelling character. We need to work him into, the center of things. Oh crap, this Saul Goodman guy is so much more interesting than we conceived. We wrote him for 2 episodes, but we need him back forever now. So if you're willing to run with it, the story will end up running you in good ways as well as bad. Anyhow, that's just what I wanted to address in that respect.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing really quick. Sometimes, well, oftentimes, for writers, as Scott has said, you get this character, you introduce him or her in your book, you're starting to work with that particular character, and that character will take off and take you in directions you never imagined the story was going to go, and it's typically a lot more interesting areas than you had imagined. So a lot of times the characters will take on their own lives, and they'll let the writer know where they want to go, so to speak. So that does happen.
Okay, right. Thank you. All right, go ahead, please.
It occurred to me that what really separates a redeemable villain from an irredeemable villain, both for themselves and for the audience, is how much autonomy they perceive to have in their lives. Like Darth Vader, we keep getting told over and over again that he's been consumed by the dark side, and we see that personification in Return of the Jedi from the Emperor, who is actually evil. And Darth Vader killing him at the end is supposed to be him throwing off the dark side itself. And everybody cheers for him because they started seeing him as, somebody who's just as much a victim as anything else. And it's kind of the same with Jaime Lannister. He's had, he's been a follower, an obeyer of everybody, his father, his sister, the kings, and when he finally starts getting his own autonomy and starts explaining, his own motivations, people start becoming more sympathetic. It's all about how much in control of their actions they perceive themselves to be, and how much the readers do. I don't know how many people here have seen the new She-Ra, but speaking very broadly, the villains in that movie, or in that series, they all have a kind of journey that involves trying to throw off, having to report to a successively higher evil above them, and they all have to try and find something to do with their lives once they're no longer under that umbrella, and that's the key to their redemption arcs.
I think it comes down to, in your world, or the world of the story, the view of evil, and that, I'm just going back, like, is it the Manichaean universe where you've got like good and evil is evil just because, like, they're opposing forces, it's that, you know, they're always fighting one way or the other, or is it more of that Boethian, like, there is no evil, there's just what happens when good people fail to do good. So Darth Vader is one of those, like, he has agency, he is able to do the right thing, and every time he chooses not to. And then, like, how much free will does he have? Is it the dark side that is taking away his ability to choose to do good? Because at the end, he does overcome that. So I think those kinds of questions of how much autonomy a character has or free will is gonna come down to what kind of evil exists in your universe. Is it a force, like a separate thing, or is it just humans making bad choices?
And the lack of and ability to have your own agency, both ways. The lack of agency can make you a bystander that is no longer innocent if you're forced to make these choices. Because, I mean, you go back to Nazi Germany, they were making these terrible choices because they had a higher power telling them what to do. That makes them just as bad, right? You have to think about things like that. So someone who has the agency to make bad choices and makes them can make a true villain that is unsympathetic, because they have the opportunity to do good and they choose not to, or they have the opportunity to just not be evil, right? So that agency or lack of agency is a key factor in how sympathetic or unsympathetic a villain can be.
Yeah, and part of this is just, I mean, the fine art of remembering and presenting human perspective. I mean, everybody in this room, as you pass through your lives, like, there's somebody out there right now who thinks that you are one of the worst people they ever ran into because they bumped into you for 2 minutes at a particularly bad time. I have memories of people in high school, and I think of them as, God, what an incredible jerk. But if I actually think about it, it's like, I probably had about 3 minutes of interaction with that person over the course of the 4 years we were locked in that building together. And presenting that in fiction is also really, really important. That, an awful lot of whether we perceive characters as heroic or anti-heroic, a lot of whether, how we accept their characters is what glimpses of their full life do we get to get. We peer in Darth Vader's life, through a keyhole. We see itty bitty pieces of it. We get his story from some other people. We see his struggle in Return of the Jedi. We see his, final moment of redemption and death, and that's it. There's an awful lot elided in between. And so it is with literally every character in every story that we ever make, if we're creating real human portraits.
And to go along with that, if you do have that character, that anti-hero, or even that villain that makes the good choice in the end, the writer has to make that believable. You don't want that choice to just happen out of the blue. And I'll pull on the Darth Vader string again. With the original trilogy, yes, we had a very small keyhole that we were looking through into Darth Vader and who he was at that time. But even with what, A New Hope, Episode 4, it's the first one. It's the original in my view. Darth Vader, what does he want? He wants Luke Skywalker. He's after Luke. He's after Luke. And of course, the audience, first time watching that, it's like, why is he? Yeah, Luke's the good guy. That's why Vader wants him. And then in Empire Strikes Back, you find out, oh, wait, Luke is Vader's son. And so Vader wants Luke to join him. He really wants to pass on a legacy to Luke. And so you see, early up, even at that point, you see, okay, Vader, there's something here. He wants to help. He wants what is best for Luke. And so at the very end, in Return of the Jedi, when he kills the Emperor to save Luke, it's like, okay, well, that makes sense because we've already seen hints of this, and so it's believable to us. So you don't want your anti-hero to make the good choice just all of a sudden out of the blue with no background on that. It needs to be believable when they do the right thing.
Okay, we're very close on time, so I'm gonna take one last question. Sorry, you've already had a couple questions. And then we'll wrap it up, okay? Thank you.
Real quick, I wanted to ask about anti-heroes in popular media, and I think to a lot of readers and writers, are generally perceived as needing some sort of direction. And by that I mean anti-heroes, there's this expectation in my mind that by the end of the story they are going to be basically be heroes, and or more rarely they're going to fall and become villains. Do you agree with that? And if not, how do you tackle maintaining an anti-hero over the course of like a long series, keeping them as an anti-hero and keeping them morally gray, and not fully like committing them to becoming a full hero or villain? Makes sense. Yeah.
Allora, you?
Oh,
Yeah.
so I can say that it is a difficult line to walk if you're doing it for a long series, right? Because when you don't want it to get like an old bit, right? You know, you don't want to make them fall too far too fast. But they will have those ups and downs to maintain that morally gray, right? I think you're talking more of like a creative structure, right, in the crafting of it. So to go a little bit into craft talk, you have to look at your long-term journey, right? You can make them heroes specifically for like a book, maybe two, or you can make them a villain that can be the main anchor point of a single plot, right? And they can redeem themselves and fall in that series. In such a long series, there's a lot of opportunity for a writer to take that craft and mess with it.
Okay. Does anybody want to do a follow-up? Because it is 11. Is that good? Okay, we're good. All right, so it is 11 o'clock. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Before we all take off, can you let us know where to find you next, or on the internet, or whatever your projects are? Philip, let's start with you and work your way back to me.
All right, you can find me online at philipligon.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, Substack. As far as here at the con, I've got a panel at 4 o'clock. Steam Power is sci-fi, right? That'll be an interesting one. And then tomorrow, The Path to Deliciousness, Food and Alternate History. Which will be an interesting panel.
All right, you can find me at tomorrow all day at vendor booth 1320 if you want to pick up a copy of my books, see what they're about, maybe. I'm also on a couple more panels today. I have at 1 p.m. Hi, I'm not Matt Dinneman, but I write Lit RPG too, and Paquette. And then I'm on in this room again tonight at 7 at a wizard duel, you say, where we pick the best wizard in literature.
It is a bracket tournament with audience participation.
Yeah, you should show up.
Author J.M. Paquette, I have cards up here. I have books. At 1, I'm on a Bridgerton panel, and then tomorrow at 11:30 in this room, I'm on Scouring of the Shire for Tolkien's.
Henceforth, I guess you'll have to find me online, because apparently the con comes to an end and we get kicked out of our hotel room. Scott, Lynch.us, not .com. There was, when I started my career, there was a famous NASCAR driver named Scott Lynch, and he got .com, but he has retired as far as I know. So someday I'm going to get it from him. Someday, but it's scottlynch.us.